December 16, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Dawn breaks late beneath a sky the color of gunmetal. Snow muffles the sound of boots as Private First Class Harold Meyer of the 106th Infantry Division tightens his scarf and peers into the trees. The forest is quiet, unnaturally so. Then, without warning, the silence shatters. Artillery crashes through the frozen air. The ground trembles. Somewhere ahead, German tanks grind forward, their engines echoing through the woods like distant thunder. Within minutes, the Western Front, thought secure, is cracking open. This is the opening blow of Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, the German Ardennes Offensive, Hitler's last gamble. And as radios across Europe crackle with panicked reports, one name immediately resurfaces in Allied headquarters, spoken with equal parts hope and dread. George S. Patton. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, General Dwight D. Eisenhower listens grimly as the situation unfolds. Entire American units are being overrun. Roads are choked with refugees and retreating troops. Bastogne, a vital road hub, is nearly encircled. Around the long conference table, Allied generals exchange uneasy glances. They all know what this means. If the Germans are to be stopped, someone must move fast, faster than doctrine allows, faster than prudence recommends. But Patton, for years many of these men have questioned whether George Smith Patton Jr. is a liability disguised as a weapon. They remember Sicily, July 1943, Patton slapping a shell-shocked soldier in a field hospital, calling him a coward. The incident nearly ended his career. Eisenhower himself had forced Patton to apologize, quietly sidelining him from public command. They remember his profanity-laced speeches, his obsession with speed, his belief that hesitation was worse than error. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery once remarked that Patton was dangerous, but occasionally useful. Even among Americans, Patton's reputation is divided. General Omar Bradley respects his results, but fears his recklessness. "He's our best," Bradley once said, "and our worst." Yet by late 1944, Patton commands the U.S. Third Army, a force that has carved a brutal path across France. His men have advanced hundreds of miles in weeks, outrunning their supply lines, seizing bridges before German engineers can destroy them. Speed is Patton's religion. And now, as German panzers punch through the Ardennes, speed is exactly what the Allies lack. On December 18th, Eisenhower convenes an emergency meeting. The maps on the wall tell a grim story, a massive German bulge swelling westward, threatening to split Allied armies in two. The question hangs in the air. Who can strike back? Patton, seated at the table, has been unusually quiet. His pearl-handled pistols rest at his side. His eyes track the map, calculating. While others debate contingencies, Patton has already made a decision. Eisenhower finally turns to him. "George," he asks, "what can you do?" Patton doesn't hesitate. "Sir," he says evenly, "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours." The room goes silent. Bradley stares at him. Montgomery raises an eyebrow. 48 hours is absurd. Patton's army is facing east, driving toward the German border. To counterattack the Ardennes, he would have to pivot north, through winter storms, over icy roads, against a surprise enemy offensive. No army has ever done that. But Patton isn't bluffing. Unknown to Eisenhower, Patton had anticipated disaster weeks earlier. He had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans, 3 separate counteroffensives, already drafted, already rehearsed. One of them pointed directly at Bastogne. To Patton, war is not chaos. It is motion, and motion favors the bold. Eisenhower studies him for a long moment. He knows Patton's flaws, the temper, the ego, the risk-taking, but he also knows this: no other commander in Europe thinks faster, moves faster, or fights harder. "Do it," Eisenhower finally says, and just like that, the man many Allied generals feared most is unleashed at the moment of greatest danger. That night, as snow begins to fall heavier across the Ardennes, Patton returns to his headquarters. He summons his staff, his voice sharp and urgent. "Gentlemen," he says, "we're going north." Maps are redrawn. Orders are barked. Columns of tanks, trucks, and artillery begin turning on frozen roads. an entire army rotating like a giant steel compass needle. Drivers curse the ice. Engineers clear blocked bridges under fire. Fuel trucks race through the dark. Somewhere ahead, in the encircled town of Bastogne, American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne are running out of ammunition. They don't know it yet, but the most reckless general in the Allied command is already on the move. December 19, 1944, near Nancy, France. The temperature drops below freezing as night settles over the Third Army. Engines growl in the darkness, coughing plumes of white vapor into the air. Headlights are hooded, reduced to thin slits of light barely cutting through the snow. On icy roads never meant for this kind of traffic, American armor begins an impossible maneuver. An entire field army is turning 90 degrees in winter, under combat conditions. At the center of it all is General George S. Patton, Jr., standing over a map table inside his command trailer. The air smells of cigarette smoke and wet wool. Officers crowd around him, fatigue etched into their faces. "Speed," Patton snaps. "Speed is the only thing that matters." The order has gone out. 3 Corps under General John Milliken will spearhead the attack north. 4th Armored Division, 26th Infantry Division, and 80th Infantry Division are to move immediately. No delays, no excuses. This is not how armies are supposed to operate. Standard doctrine demands days, sometimes weeks, to regroup, resupply, and reposition forces of this size. Roads must be reconnoitered, flanks secured, supply lines stabilized. Patton discards all of it. He knows the Germans are gambling everything. Their fuel reserves are limited. Their timetable is tight. If Bastogne holds, the entire offensive could unravel, and Bastogne must hold. As Third Army units grind north, chaos reigns along the roads. Tanks skid off embankments. Trucks jackknife on ice. Military police scream directions into the storm, desperately trying to keep columns moving. At one crossroads, a Sherman tank blocks traffic after throwing a track. Patton himself arrives minutes later, his face flushed with cold and fury. "How long?" he demands. "Couple hours, sir," an officer replies. Patton doesn't slow. "Push it off the road," he says. "Leave it." The tank is shoved aside into the snow. The column moves on. To Patton, perfection is the enemy. Momentum is life. Farther north, German commanders are stunned by what they're seeing. Intelligence reports flood in. American forces are massing faster than expected, much faster. General Hasso von Manteuffel, leading the German 5th Panzer Army, notes the sudden pressure on his southern flank. This is not part of the plan. The Americans were supposed to be confused, slow, reactive. Instead, something is coming straight at Bastogne. By December 21st, snowstorms worsen. Visibility drops to near zero. Aircraft are grounded on both sides, turning the battle into a brutal contest of ground forces alone. Inside Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe of the 101st Airborne receives a German surrender demand. His reply is legendary. "Nuts!" But bravado cannot replace ammunition. Artillery shells are nearly gone. Medical supplies are critically low. Wounded men lie in freezing barns, wrapped in blankets stiff with ice. Every road into Bastogne is cut, except one, still contested, still barely open, from the south. That road is Patton's objective. On December 22nd, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division slam into German roadblocks outside the village of Martelange. The fighting is savage. German anti-tank guns tear into Shermans at close range. Infantry battle through snow-covered forests, tree to tree, foxhole to foxhole. Progress is measured in yards. Patton is relentless. He radios his commanders constantly, demanding updates, demanding movement. When told an attack has stalled, he explodes. "Attack again," he orders. "Attack at night. Attack through them." One division commander protests the conditions, the snow, the cold, the enemy strength. Patton cuts him off. "Let the Germans freeze," he says. "We'll keep moving." On December 23rd, the skies finally clear. Allied aircraft roar overhead, dropping supplies into Bastogne. Parachutes blossom white against the blue sky, ammunition, food, medical kits. Morale inside the pocket surges. So does German anxiety. They know what this means. Clear skies bring American air power, and somewhere south of Bastogne, Patton's tanks are getting closer. By December 24th, Christmas Eve, the lead combat command of the 4th Armored Division reaches the village of Ardennes, just miles from Bastogne. German resistance stiffens. This is the last line. Patton issues a simple order. Take Bastogne. At 4:50 p.m., a Sherman tank commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess punches through German lines and rolls into the outskirts of the town. Paratroopers emerge from foxholes, cheering despite their exhaustion. The siege is broken. Patton has done the impossible. In less than 3 days, he turned an army, crossed treacherous terrain, and smashed into the heart of Hitler's last offensive. The Western Front, once on the brink of disaster, begins to stabilize. But the battle is not over, and Patton is not finished. December 26, 1944. Outside Bastogne, Belgium. The snow is churned black by tracks and blood. As dawn breaks, the sounds of battle do not fade. They deepen. Artillery thunders across frozen fields. Machine guns chatter from shattered tree lines. The relief of Bastogne is not an ending, only a turning point. Patton knows it. Inside his forward command post, Patton studies the situation map. The bulge still exists. German forces are battered but dangerous. And now, as supply lines reopen, the real work begins. Not rescue, but destruction. Keep pushing, Patton orders. No letting up. His Third Army surges north and east, driving into the exposed southern shoulder of the German offensive. Infantry regiments advance through knee-deep snow. Engineers rebuild bridges under fire. Medics work bare-handed in sub-zero temperatures, fingers numb, cutting away frozen uniforms. The cost of Patton's speed is becoming clear. Casualty reports stack up. Frostbite cases rival combat wounds. Vehicles fail. Men collapse from exhaustion. General Omar Bradley arrives at Patton's headquarters to assess the situation. He listens as Patton rattles off unit movements, casualty figures, fuel consumption, every detail sharp in his mind. Bradley finally interrupts. "George," he says carefully, "you're driving them too hard." Patton doesn't look up. "Hell," he replies, "I haven't started yet." This is the essence of Patton, a commander who believes pressure saves lives by ending wars faster, even as it grinds men down in the present. To his soldiers, he is both savior and tormentor. Some curse his name in foxholes, others swear by him. German resistance stiffens as elite units are rushed into the fight. Remnants of the 2nd Panzer Division, Volksgrenadiers, SS formations desperate to hold open escape routes. They fight with the fury of men who know the war is slipping away. At one crossroads near Chaumont, American infantry are pinned down by German armor. Snow explodes under shell fire. Casualties mount. Patton arrives again, as he often does, unexpectedly, dangerously close to the front. He steps from his vehicle, pearl-handled pistols at his side, and surveys the chaos. "What's the hold-up?" he demands. "Panthers, sir," a captain shouts. "We can't get through." Patton points forward. "Then go around them," he says, "or over them, but don't stop." The attack resumes. By early January 1945, the German offensive is bleeding out. Fuel shortages cripple panzer units. Allied air power, unleashed under clear skies, savages retreating columns. Roads are littered with burned-out vehicles, abandoned guns, frozen bodies. Patton presses on regardless. His orders are blunt. Drive the Germans back to their start lines. Erase the bulge. At Allied headquarters, attitudes are changing. The same generals who once feared Patton's recklessness now study his results in silence. His Third Army has absorbed the shock, counter-attacked with precision, and restored coherence to a front that nearly collapsed. Montgomery, never generous with praise, privately admits that Patton's maneuver saved the southern flank. Eisenhower notes that without Patton's speed, Bastogne would likely have fallen. Even Bradley, though still wary, acknowledges the truth. Patton was right, but victory does not soften him. On January 8, 1945, Patton orders another push, this time east, back toward the German border. The Winter War grinds on, brutal and unforgiving. That evening, Patton writes in his diary, "Success is how you judge a soldier. No mention of the dead, no reflection on the cost, just the mission." As January closes, the Ardennes Offensive is officially over. Hitler's last gamble has failed, The Western Front is stabilized. More than that, it is advancing again. And at its center stands a general once considered too dangerous to trust. Yet even in triumph, Patton remains controversial. His methods, his temperament, his belief in relentless attack unsettle politicians and peers alike. Some wonder whether he can be controlled. Others wonder if he ever should be. For now, the war continues. Germany still stands. And Patton, already looking east toward the Rhine, is preparing to do what he has always done best. Move faster than anyone thinks possible. January 25, 1945. Near the Our River, Luxembourg. The Ardennes are quiet again, but only because the storm has passed. Wrecked German armor lies half buried in snowdrifts, twisted metal marking where the offensive finally bled to death. For the men of the Third Army, there is no pause to reflect. Patton has already issued new orders. The direction is east, Germany. Patton stands at the edge of the river, binoculars raised. Across the frozen water, enemy positions sit thin and brittle. The Wehrmacht is exhausted, its reserves spent. What remains is resistance by inertia, units fighting because they have not yet been told to stop. Patton lowers the glasses. "We'll cross here," he says. There is no ceremony, no long deliberation. Engineers begin assembling bridges within hours, working under intermittent shell fire. Infantry slip across in assault boats before dawn, weapons held above icy water. It is the same pattern that has defined Patton's war since North Africa. Pressure without pause. At Allied headquarters, the conversation has shifted. The question is no longer whether Patton is reckless. It is whether anyone else could have done what he did. Eisenhower reviews after-action reports from the Ardennes. The data is stark. Patton's Third Army responded faster than any other Allied formation. His pivot maneuver remains unmatched in scale and speed. Bastogne held because Patton arrived when doctrine said he could not. In private correspondence, Eisenhower writes that Patton's performance was decisive. For Patton, it is not enough. He believes the enemy is still off balance. He believes hesitation now would squander momentum. His critics worry he is pushing too far, too fast again. But the results continue to silence them. By February, Third Army forces are crossing the Sauer and pushing toward the Moselle. German defenses crumble under constant assault. Prisoners stream west, gaunt, hollow-eyed, stunned by the tempo of American attacks. One captured German officer asks an American interpreter how long Patton has been fighting without rest. The interpreter shrugs. "He doesn't rest," he says. Among Patton's men, the mood is conflicted. Losses have been heavy. The winter has been merciless. Yet there is pride, a sense that they stood at the breaking point of the war and pushed back. They know the truth, even if they never say it aloud. If Patton had been slower, if he had waited, if he had obeyed the cautious instincts of higher command, Bastogne would have fallen, the bulge would have widened, the war would have dragged on. In March 1945, Patton's Third Army crosses the Rhine, a psychological barrier the Germans believed would protect their homeland. Again, Patton moves faster than expected, exploiting crossings before enemy forces can react. As American troops fan out across Germany, the end begins to feel inevitable. Patton, however, remains restless. He complains about restrictions, about political caution, about not being allowed to push deeper, faster, harder. He wants to drive straight to Berlin. He will not be allowed. The war will end without him there. Yet history will remember the winter of 1944, the moment when the Western Front nearly collapsed, and one commander's recklessness became its salvation. George S. Patton, Jr. never stopped being dangerous. But in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, danger was exactly what the Allies needed. March 28, 1945, near Oppenheim, Germany. The Rhine flows wide and dark beneath a low grey sky. Pontoon bridges stretch across the river, swaying slightly as columns of American armor rumble east. Patton watches from the western bank, hands clasped behind his back, helmet tilted forward. For him, this crossing is not symbolic. It is overdue. Just weeks earlier, other Allied armies had staged carefully choreographed Rhine crossings, airborne drops, massive artillery barrages, photographers on hand. Patton had done it differently, quietly, quickly, almost casually. When reporters ask him how it feels to cross the Rhine, Patton bristles. "I didn't know it was guarded by a river god," he snaps. To the very end, he remains impatient with caution. As Third Army pours into Germany, resistance collapses in layers. Towns fall in hours. Units surrender by the thousands. The speed that once terrified Allied planners now terrifies the enemy. But the same qualities that saved the Western Front begin to isolate Patton again. His blunt speech, his disdain for politics, his refusal to soften language for peacetime ears, all of it returns to the foreground. He publicly criticizes denazification. He clashes with journalists. He says what others think, but will not say aloud. The war in Europe ends on May 7, 1945. Germany surrenders. For Patton, there is no triumph, no sense of closure. He tells his staff that he feels cheated, that the real enemy still exists, that the job is unfinished. He talks openly about turning east, about the Soviet army, about another war. His superiors listen and quietly decide he has become too volatile. Within months, Patton is reassigned to command the US 15th Army, a paper formation tasked with writing history. For a man who lives for movement, it is exile. On December 9, 1945, near Mannheim, Germany, Patton is injured in a car accident. 12 days later, he is dead. The man who survived North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, the Ardennes, and Germany is undone not by battle, but by stillness. History, however, does not forget him. In the years that follow, historians return again and again to the winter of 1944. They analyze maps, timelines, orders. They debate whether Patton was brilliant or reckless, lucky or inevitable. But on one point, there is no argument. When the Western Front bent to the breaking point, when Allied confidence wavered and German armor surged through snow and fog, George S. Patton Jr. moved. He moved when others hesitated. He attacked when others defended. He risked everything and won. The generals who once feared him never fully trusted him, but in the Ardennes, trust was replaced by results, and results saved the Western Front. Spring 1946, Washington, D.C. The war rooms are quiet now. Maps that once dictated life and death hang motionless on walls, their pins removed, their meaning fading. In lecture halls, staff colleges, and closed-door Pentagon briefings, officers dissect the war piece by piece, searching for lessons that might apply to the next one. Again and again, one name provokes debate: Patton. Some analysts argue his success was circumstantial, that German fuel shortages, Allied air power, and sheer numerical superiority would have doomed the Ardennes offensive regardless. Others counter with timelines, pointing to the narrow window when Bastogne nearly fell, when a delay of even 24 hours could have shattered the front. In those moments, doctrine did not save the Allies. Speed did, and speed had a face. Survivors of the 101st Airborne years later would recall hearing the rumble of tanks approaching Bastogne from the south. Not knowing whose they were, not daring to hope, then seeing the white star. For them, Patton was not reckless. He was relief. Among historians, a consensus slowly forms. Not that Patton was flawless, but that war sometimes demands commanders who break rules rather than follow them. Men who accept risk as currency, who understand that caution at the wrong moment can be fatal. Patton understood that moment. He had always believed he was meant for war, that history moved through him, not around him. That hesitation was a moral failure. Those beliefs made him unbearable in peace. They made him indispensable in crisis. The Ardennes was that crisis. When the Western Front trembled, when Allied unity frayed under pressure, Patton did what he had always done. He attacked the problem head-on, faster than anyone thought possible, with an army already in motion before permission was fully given. The generals who once tried to restrain him never again doubted what he could do. They simply feared when he might do it again. And that is the paradox George S. Patton Jr. left behind. A commander too dangerous to trust in calm moments, yet exactly the man history called upon when everything was on the verge of collapse. In the frozen forests of Belgium, recklessness did not break the Allied line. It saved it. And long after the snow melted, that truth endured. December 1944 exists now only in memory, but memory has weight. In veterans' reunions decades later, men who survived the Ardennes still describe the cold first, the way rifles froze, the way breath burned, the way time seemed to slow as German artillery walked closer through the trees. They talk about confusion, about orders that never came, about commanders who vanished, about a front line that no longer felt like a line at all. And then, movement. Not German movement, American. Columns pushing north when logic said they could not. Tanks appearing where maps said roads were impassable. Infantry arriving exhausted but relentless, attacking immediately instead of digging in. That movement had a source. Patton never commanded from afar during the Ardennes. He pushed forward constantly, shifting headquarters closer to the fighting, demanding updates by the hour. He visited units at the edge of collapse, sometimes offering encouragement, sometimes fury, always urgency. "Don't hold ground," he told officers. "Take ground." It was a philosophy forged long before 1944. In North Africa, Patton had learned that hesitation gave the enemy time. In Sicily, he had learned that speed could compensate for imperfect coordination. In France, he had proven that momentum could become a weapon in itself. The Ardennes was where all of it converged. There is a moment historians return to. December 19, 1944, Eisenhower's headquarters. When Patton, alone in the room, had an answer ready while others were still asking questions. That was not luck. That was preparation shaped by temperament. Patton had anticipated catastrophe because he expected it. He believed war punished optimism and rewarded aggression. While others assumed the Germans were finished, Patton assumed they would strike again. And when they did, his army was already coiled. This is why Allied generals both needed and feared him. Patton was not a tool you used lightly. He did not fit neatly into coalition warfare. He embarrassed politicians. He complicated diplomacy. He frightened staff officers who valued control. But when the front cracked, not in theory, not on paper, but in snow and blood, Patton did not ask permission from circumstances. He acted. German commanders understood this too late. Post-war interrogations reveal surprise bordering on disbelief. They had counted on American rigidity, on slow reactions, on predictable responses. They did not expect an entire army to pivot in winter and attack immediately. They did not expect Patton. By January 1945, the Ardennes Offensive was not merely stopped, it was reversed. German losses were irreplaceable. Fuel reserves were gone. Veteran formations were shattered. Hitler's last chance to change the war in the West died in frozen fields south of Bastogne. Patton did not win the Battle of the Bulge alone, but without Patton, it might not have been won in time. That distinction matters. Wars are not only decided by strength, but by moments, narrow windows when decisions carry disproportionate weight, when delay costs more than defeat, when boldness is not a gamble, but a necessity. The Ardennes was such a moment, and history chose a man who had spent his entire life preparing for moments like that, even when no one else wanted him to. George S. Patton Jr. remains controversial because he forces an uncomfortable question. What kind of leader do you want when everything goes wrong? Someone careful or someone fast? In December 1944, the Western Front answered that question. Not with words, but with movement, and it survived because of it. In the years after the war, the Ardennes is no longer a battlefield. It becomes a case study. At Fort Leavenworth, at West Point, at staff colleges across NATO, officers lean over maps of Belgium and Luxembourg. They trace arrows in red and blue. They argue about timelines, logistics, command relationships, and inevitably the discussion turns to Patton. Could his maneuver be replicated? The answer more often than not is no. Not because it was poorly planned, but because it depended on a personality willing to act before certainty existed. A commander comfortable issuing orders in incomplete darkness, trusting instinct sharpened by experience, rather than waiting for perfect information. Patton's Third Army pivot becomes a lesson in operational audacity, a term that barely existed before the war. His actions in December 1944 are later folded into doctrine under cleaner, safer language: initiative, tempo, exploitation. But those words lacked the rawness of what it actually was, a gamble. Patton understood something many commanders resist admitting, that war does not reward balance, it rewards timing, and timing demands decision. The irony is that the very traits that made Patton dangerous in peacetime became institutionalized after his death. Modern armies teach flexibility, decentralized command, rapid exploitation, ideas Patton practiced intuitively, often against orders. His critics once argued he was undisciplined. History quietly adopted his discipline. Today, when historians assess the Battle of the Bulge, they no longer ask whether Patton was reckless. They ask what would have happened if he had not been there. A longer siege at Bastogne, a wider German penetration, a fractured Allied front, a war extended by months. None of those outcomes were inevitable, but they were possible. And Patton existed to destroy possibilities before they became realities. The men who served under him carried scars, both physical and emotional. Some never forgave him for the pace he demanded. Others named their sons after him. Both reactions are true because Patton was not a comfortable leader. He was a necessary one. In the end, history does not absolve him of his flaws. It does not excuse his temper, his cruelty, or his inability to adapt to peace, but it places him where he belongs. At the moment of greatest danger, when the Western Front bent under the weight of Hitler's last gamble, the Allies turned to a man they barely trusted and unleashed him anyway. He did not disappoint. Recklessness did not break the line. It held it. And in the frozen winter of 1944, that made all the difference. December 31st, 1944, somewhere south of Bastogne. The old year dies under artillery fire. As midnight approaches, American soldiers crouch in foxholes carved into frozen earth. There is no celebration, no countdown, only the distant flash of guns and the steady creak of trees swaying under snow. The German offensive is still breathing, barely. Patton knows the danger is not past until the enemy is driven back beyond hope. He refuses to let up. Orders continue to flow through the night. Units rotate, resupply, attack again. This is not about territory anymore. It is about breaking will. German units attempt local counterattacks, probing for weakness. They find none. Everywhere they push, Third Army pressure answers immediately. Artillery concentrations, infantry assaults, armor thrusts that leave no room to regroup. The front line stiffens, then hardens. What began as emergency reaction becomes dominance. By early January, German commanders begin requesting withdrawals. Fuel allocations are cut. Units report strength at fractions of their original numbers. Veteran panzer crews abandon tanks that cannot move. Patton senses it. Their hearts aren't in it anymore, he tells his staff. Hit them again. And again they do. Each mile gained south of Bastogne is paid for in blood, but each mile denies the Germans something they cannot replace: time. The Allied line no longer bends, it pushes. On January 16, 1945, American and British forces link up, pinching off the Bulge. The German offensive officially ends not with a dramatic collapse, but with exhaustion. Hitler's last throw of the dice has failed. In the after-action reports, the language is clinical. Dates, distances, casualty figures. But beneath the numbers lies an uncomfortable truth for Allied high command. They had nearly lost control, and control had been restored by a man they had spent years trying to restrain. Patton never celebrates it. He simply turns east, because to him, victory is not an event. It is motion continuing in the right direction. Years later, historians will debate tactics and logistics, intelligence failures and weather conditions. They will argue percentages and probabilities. But soldiers who were there remember something simpler. They remember the sound of tanks arriving when they expected silence. They remember attacks ordered when retreat seemed safer. They remember that someone, somewhere above them, refused to accept collapse. That someone was George S. Patton, Jr., the general too reckless to trust, the general who saved the Western Front when it mattered most. And when the snow finally melted from the Ardennes, the line still stood. When the snow finally melts in the Ardennes, it reveals what winter hid. Burned-out Shermans rusting beside Panthers, shallow graves marked with helmets and rifles, forests torn apart by shell fire, their silence returning only slowly. The land remembers long after the armies move on. So do the men. For the soldiers of the Third Army, the Ardennes is never just another battle. It is the moment they learned what their general truly was. Not the caricature from speeches and headlines, but a force of nature who refused to accept defeat as an option. They remember Patton visiting the front, boots crunching in snow, eyes blazing with urgency. They remember his anger, his impossible demands, his absolute certainty that forward was the only direction that mattered. Some hated him for it. Most survived because of it. In the months that follow, as the Allies drive deeper into Germany, the lessons of the Ardennes linger. Commanders are quicker to act, more willing to seize opportunity, less afraid of being wrong, because they have seen the cost of being slow. Patton does not live to see how fully his moment will define him, but history does. It strips away the noise, the scandals, the speeches, the controversy, and fixes its gaze on December 1944, when everything was at risk. When weather grounded planes, intelligence failed, and confidence wavered, and when one commander moved anyway. Allied generals had feared George S. Patton Jr. for years. They feared his recklessness because it exposed their caution. They feared his speed because it left no room for comfortable control. Yet when the Western Front nearly shattered, it was that recklessness, disciplined by experience, sharpened by instinct, that restored balance. Patton did not save the war alone, but without him the winter would have lasted longer, the cost would have been higher, and the line might not have held. That is his legacy. Not perfection, not comfort, but action at the precise moment when action mattered most. In war, that is often the difference between survival and collapse. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, history made its judgment clear.